Klusendorf. I'm here to welcome you to another Life Odyssey event. And these guys haven't left me much to do besides introduce them and maybe do a little container for the program this morning. So there's very little facilitating. I'm possibly going to be able to hit my cues online on time with the PowerPoint presentation. I've known both of them for 2 or 3 decades, and first met Stan and Peggy through the crisis intervention and conservatorship work that I did, meeting Stan's son, and later, many years later, connected with the church and got a hold of Peggy and did some classes with her, and then a few years after that became her personal assistant, and which rolled into administrator for Glacier Circle. So Stan here has been kind of a substitute surrogate father, mentor, guide, colleague for probably 3 decades. So I'm happy to be working with him today. And then Kirk, of course, is more of that pesky big brother who never lets me off the hook. And I've worked with him in maybe the last 20 years with various worship programs, and he always makes me go about 2 levels deeper than I was willing to go. But every time that I've gotten to work with him or see him at the gym memorizing poems, he's made me a better person.
It's been stressful for her because I've only known her for 8 years.
And it feels like 20 to me.
Right.
So today's presentation is divided into 2 parts. But it's not 2 people parts. We have the first part of the presentation is more what we call the strategic life of these gentlemen, the events, the places, the people that formed them, that informed their lives. And then the second half of the presentation, after a brief break, will be more their soul lives. So what they did with all that experience and information. And before I have Stan start, just going through this process brought me to a favorite Georgia O'Keeffe quote. And she says, "Where I was born and where and how I lived is unimportant. It is what I have done with where I have been that should be of interest."
In my life odyssey, I sailed from place to place, as did Odysseus in his journey around the Mediterranean. I identify with his perseverance and his skill and luck in getting out of difficulties. But his dependence on the Greek gods differed a lot from my perception. I regard my life adventure more fundamentally as an evolution, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually, that brought me to my present self. I start with a strategic phase of my life, embracing the goal of accomplishment, which my family passed on to me. Grandparents. My maternal grandparents were farmers who grew up and farmed near Fresno. I treasured my experience with them as I stayed with them in a loving atmosphere during summer vacations from 4th grade through high school. Though dedicated Christians, they seemed to tolerate my becoming an atheist in the 5th grade. On their raisin farm, I learned to work hard picking grapes in the San Joaquin sun. I also learned about having fun during lunch break with the Okies, who constituted the crew to get the grapes off the vines. I was disappointed when they were drafted near the end of World War II and were replaced by different crews of Mexicans who spoke little English and seemed much more serious. Parents. My mother was a devoted and helpful presence. My father started as an engineer in the oil fields fresh out of Stanford and worked for Standard Oil Chevron his whole career. He ended up being in charge of several major oil field developments. His career required moving us to various oil field offices around the state, producing a kind of Odyssey for our little family. In the latter part of their lives, they always brought the family together for major occasions. My relationship with Father seemed intense, and it got scary when he was angry with me. He insisted on competence, even when I was 4 or 5 years old. In elementary school, he and Mother required me to take my sisters to Sunday school, even after I, a declared atheist, told him how boring it was for me to sit through all those inexplicable songs and lessons. Often, though, Father did encourage some of my strong interests, even getting me a really good bike, a nice chemistry set, and relevant science books on successive Christmases. In the summer, before I was to start junior high school, he and my mother pressured me to give up my favorite friend because he was Jewish. And some of that stigma might be difficult for me. Also, Father prohibited me from working as a paper boy so I would have time for sports, study, and chores. By junior high school, Father was insisting that I get all A's in mathematics, which I did. Looking back at my college, I did. In high school, he pressured me to go out for football on the team for small boys, and I did. Looking back at my college choices, I see I was unconsciously following him by going to Stanford and majoring in mechanical engineering, as he had done. Early life. After I was born in Coalinga in 1931, we moved to another San Joaquin oil town, Taft, and my 2 sisters were born shortly after me. My basic education took place in Palo Alto, first in an old elementary school with really good teachers in their successive specialties, art, music, arithmetic, and science. In the 6th grade, I got to demonstrate some fun chemistry experiments to the whole class, which reinforced my confidence and interest in science. I also benefited from activities at the very special community center and park, including Boy Scouts and Junior Science Museum. My father took the family back to that desert oil town of Taft in World War II. There I had 4 years of high school with mostly pretty good teachers. I was able to start the science club, which I think is still going. Through sports, I got to know some of the rough kids whose fathers labored in the oil fields. I was glad to get their respect in football and especially in track. As they mostly did not take the same academic classes that I did. After studying hard and getting a generous Navy scholarship, I felt ready for college. When I was 16, my mother gave birth to my wonderful little brother. He became an important part of our lives. My sisters and I helped Mother take care of him, diapers and all. Perhaps the most fun were the times when a sister and I wheeled him in the carriage around in the residential district, getting people to admire him and thinking we might look like his parents. Stanford. Going to college at Stanford away from family was exciting with plenty of challenges, but I no longer felt so self-confident, and I had doubts about studying engineering. Sometimes it just seemed almost like too much work. I had some excellent professors, of course, but I think I missed the guidance of my parents. Near the beginning of my junior year in economics class, I met a lively Jewish girl from Smith College. We became sweethearts, but she was called back at the end of that year by her father. He was not accepting a Gentile boyfriend for his daughter. On the contrary, my previously prejudiced parents graciously received her when I brought her to visit them. My sisters were by now at Stanford with me, and their occasional company offered some solace for my loneliness. As required for my scholarship, I took naval science and engineering all through 4 years. I managed to put off my naval service so I could spend a 5th year to broaden my knowledge by taking some elective humanities courses, which were not as easy as I thought. My younger sister aced the famous Shakespeare course that we took together, while I struggled to get above a C. Navy. To pay back the Navy ROTC scholarship, I went to serve 3 years on a destroyer, starting near the end of the Korean conflict. Mostly, life on board was dull, but sometimes it got exciting when I was in charge of guiding the ship in demanding situations. Heavy seas causing severe rocking and rolling. I usually did well, but I had my awkward moments. One time, when I was the preferred officer, I thought I could guide our ship alongside a huge ship anchored in a very windy Formosan harbor. But in that fierce crosswind, I could not keep the bow of our ship from poking a small hole in the other ship's hull. I never received any comment, undoubtedly because the ship's captain always had to assume responsibility. Graduate schools. I got admitted to Caltech, probably due in part to my service in the Navy. Study at this distinguished institute was my favorite educational experience, challenging but almost exhilarating. Although Caltech is mostly known for pure science and technology, it was there I had my first thoughts of public service, on how to use technology to improve the red car transit system in the Los Angeles area, a system later torn out by a consortium of oil and auto industries promoting more auto travel. That soured me on those industries, and I became leery of corporations more generally. After that exciting year, I did get my master's degree, and a couple of fellow graduate students visiting from Cambridge University in England influenced me to sail across the Atlantic to enroll in that university. The engineering department at Cambridge University admitted me to do my doctoral research on how nonlinear vibrations could cause turbine rotors to break apart. In the second of the 4 years there, I married an English girl, Lorna, who was a scientific officer investigating problems of nematodes in the local sugar beet fields. We had a great time sharing dinners and readings of Shakespeare's plays with 2 American couples at the college. I happily absorbed English culture, past and present, and was very impressed with the socialism of their Labor Party. Also, I did get to study at a vibrations institute in Germany for several summer months. In a later summer, Lorna and I trekked across Europe to a conference where I managed to arrange a position at Harvard University. Ultimately, my examiners at Cambridge did not accept my dissertation, as they ruled it should have more calculations that I did not think relevant. Harvard. At Harvard, I started a project to model the Earth's equatorial countercurrent. That project was not well conceived, and it was too far out of my experience to succeed. So without the doctoral degree or publications, I could not stay on there. Actually, I realized it was my chance to do something more public-spirited. So I got a real job in the air cleaning laboratory of the Harvard School of Public Health. But the faculty there encouraged me to study public health and do a dissertation on calculating the efficiency of fibrous filters for very small particles. I became very engaged in that, and wife Lorna focused her interest on advancing her new career of managing an avant-garde store for interior furnishings and women's wear. So we went our separate ways and eventually divorced. During that time, I went out with Mary, an acquaintance from our time at Stanford. She was working on science curricula, but decided to go back to graduate school at UC Berkeley in psychology. She stopped with a master's degree and returned to Boston, where we were married. Mary then gave birth to our baby girl, Tamar, who lived for only half a year. Our daughter died in a head-on collision after a drunk driver rounded a curve in my lane on a country highway near Hemet, California. After this horrendous event, my multiple leg and arm breaks required 4 months in hospital to heal enough to risk me flying back to Boston with a striking array of casts. Mary's ribs were painful for a while, but she came every day to visit me in the hospital and to mourn the loss of our daughter with me. Back in Boston, Mary drove my computer cards to Cambridge to feed into the giant Harvard computer and brought back the large printouts many times so I could get my calculations straightened out and finish my dissertation on filtration. She got me through it. Harvard faculty. After I received my doctorate, I was offered a job on the physiology faculty where the iron lung was invented. With an inspiring team of doctors, I worked on the theoretical mechanics of the lung, mainly research on lung function testing. I did produce some noteworthy publications, one being a theory of how the airflow is limited during forced exhale, measurements of which are the basis of standard lung function test. Near the beginning of this decade, our 2 sons were born, and we all seemed pretty happy and well connected to the community in Brookline. As a Democratic Socialist, I spent some energy on activist causes. The Great Boycott, the Doctors' March against the Vietnam War, testifying against the Plymouth nuclear reactors, testifying about harmful effects of air pollution, and even volunteering for the city of Brookline on a committee of doctors to block Harvard's proposal for a nearby power plant without pollution controls. I even went to the Community Church of Boston, a small radical Unitarian congregation. Because I did not get a promotion, Mary and I worked together to see what to do next. Eventually, I got a promising offer from California Air Resources Board in Sacramento, and Mary decided she wanted to move with me to Davis to get into the solar movement. Davis. We had a rather hard first year in Davis without connections to any residents, after feeling part of the community in Brookline and Harvard. At the ARB, I soon became manager of research on biological effects of air pollutants, leading to 10 years of finding or producing the science for air quality standards with my difficult but dedicated chief. Then I tired of managing, so I transferred to Berkeley Cal EPA office to become a staff toxicologist, an analytical position For 15 years, I reveled and sweated to identify officially several toxic air pollutants, especially diesel exhaust, the most important and the most difficult.
Thank you, Stan. For the second half of our adventure, the Soul Train. Many of you mentioned in the mid-time how interesting it is that we meet people later on in their lives these days and have no clue how they got to be the wonderful people that they are. Or we wait until the memorial service and then go, oh my gosh, look at that. So the church has put together this series in order for us to get to know our members, our founding members, our interesting people in our lives, so that we can enrich that relationship later, and that we hope after the presentation today and into the future that you continue that dialogue, not just with these lovely gentlemen, but with one another. What made you who you are today? So we're going to start with Stan again, and he'll get on to his soul journey.
My transfer to commute to Berkeley seemed to precipitate Mary and I drifting apart, perhaps partly due to some of the residual trauma of the loss of our only daughter. My elder son had moved to the far East Coast, where he remains. A little later, the biggest blow was when my younger son appeared to need treatment for a serious mental illness. That time really changed my attitude toward myself at age 60. I had been attending the Unitarian Church for a while before that, the Unitarian Church of Davis, seeking connection and especially to get insights on how to be with myself, my wife, and my sons. After that breakdown of the family, I resolved to become more aware. I became thoughtful about my life and the lives of those around me. Even though Mary and I went to family therapy, we still divorced. Since then, we both have looked after our son's needs as best we could with the help of our own therapists. With my marriage to my third wife, Peggy, I received a lot of support from her for my new approach. We thrived in our own way. I got to know and relate to her extensive family and help her navigate her increasing disabilities. With some ups and downs, we both remain deeply connected to the UU Church here. Also, I'm pleased to have made progress in becoming tolerant, even respectful of some aspects of religions, including Christianity, a goal I had in coming to this church. Also, I've been blessed to be in a church-related men's group. A General Assembly stimulated my interest in humanism, where I used my study of ethics to argue for the need for using non-theistic ethics to take the place of religious motivations. One motto developed about that time is good without a God. In what I think of as soul work, Peggy and I and others in this church had the idea of devising a way to help each other as we aged. We wanted something less institutional than the big retirement communities. Peggy, not being able to drive her car around for a social life, was anxious to get into a retirement community, but agreed to go with our small community if our group could actually accomplish the building in a timely manner. So I retired from state service and devoted myself to leading the group in the development of our small elder co-housing community. I had no experience in such matters, but had the vital help of several devoted people to build our community now called Glacier Circle. Those of us who are able at Glacier Circle continue to work at what for me is a spiritual accomplishment to support all of us.
Well, thank both of you for coming and sharing your journey, and we do have about 10 minutes for questions or reflections if someone has something they would like to ask, I can bring you the microphone.
I have nothing to ask, but I want to tell you both, and I'm afraid you'll get away from me, how meaningful today has been. I've known you both for several years, and I've never known you at all. This is wonderful. I'm really inspired. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ditto on what she just said. I found this extremely interesting, and now I don't know that I know you better, but I really understand.
I'd like to thank each of you for the contribution that you have made to the ongoing well-being of all of us on the planet. Thank you.
Both of you had a lot of formal education and other kinds of education in your lives, and as a fellow educator, I want to ask you, when you want to teach something, how do you go about it?
2 sentences or less.
3 words: by being present.
Well, I have to admit that even though I was on the faculty for a number of years, I was almost always doing research and didn't have to do much teaching. I quote, have to, but I have tried to learn to teach a bit over the years, just by really putting myself into it.
I just also wanted to extend my appreciation for sharing your stories. And I wanted to ask you, what was it like for you to accumulate all this information about yourself? And what was it like to present it for us today?
You want to go?
Okay. Well, I've been kind of working on reviewing my life for the past few years, with writing memoirs and such. Something I really appreciate, gave me a good core to do stuff. And so I was, kind of honored to be asked to do this, and so I put my mind to trying to put it all together as best I could.
Well, I mentioned in my talk I started examining my life back in 1941. Well, not 1941. That's pre-birth. Never mind. That's another story. When I was 41, and so it's been an ongoing process for me. Sometimes I've gone back in greater intensity of doing that. Certainly, when I went through my psychotherapy program in depth psychology, there's an awful lot of that work. This time it was very different because I'm 70. I know I'm getting near the end of my life because of age as well as health. So it's like it was a coalescing of all my experience. And as I found out before, when I've gone back and looked at my life, I arrived at a point of amazement and gratitude simply for what I have been through, what I've been able to accomplish within myself and with others. And I guess the biggest thing is I still want to just be generative in some way, and looking back helps me to look at how I was and can still be generative, even as I rust out.
Well, again, thank you to our speakers, and thank you all for coming. I'll close you with the same words from Georgia O'Keeffe. Where I was born and where and how I have lived is unimportant. It is what I have done with where I have been that should be of importance and interest. Have a great Sunday.